Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's been a little bit over a year since Nintendo released Breath of the Wild for the Switch and the Wii U systems, and it's also been about a year since I recorded my video, My Declining Interest in Video Games, and I thought at that 1 year mark, it's a great time to go back and take a look at this particular game. This is a game I played on the Nintendo Wii U, and I bought it actually between the time that I recorded that video, My Declining Interest in Video Games, which has gotten a lot of positive attention, lots of great suggestions. I really appreciate the feedback I've gotten on that video, by the way. But between the time I recorded the video and released it, since I had to fix some audio, I got this game, and I played it a lot, and I initially really enjoyed it. But a year later, I think that's a great time to critically evaluate it and see if it actually lived up to the hype. Because this game was the most hyped game I think I can ever remember seeing. It got more perfect scores than I've ever seen a game get. It seemed like all my friends were playing it and just loving it. So I bought it and I played it and initially had a great time. But a year later, I can come back and look at it a little more critically and say, I don't think it's as good as everyone thinks it is. Not only do I not think it is as good as people think it is, I think it's actually a rather mediocre game and is one of my least favorite Zelda games so far, and I'd like to kind of explain why. Before I explain why, let me throw some compliments at the game. I really appreciated that this game took some chances and did some stuff that was a little bit different than the last few Zelda games, because you had this string of 3D Zelda games that seemed to have a lot of the same gameplay elements. Starting with Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, you had Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword. All of them had this formula for Zelda, and this is a game that really broke out of that formula and presented the player with a lot of new stuff. While I appreciate all the chances that they took changing the formula of the games and delivering a different experience, ultimately I think it's an empty and hollow experience, and not one that ends up being very interesting. I still haven't finished the game because I just got thoroughly bored of playing it. And the main reason is that while you have this big, expansive, open world where you can seemingly go anywhere and do anything, it's essentially full of nothing. There's nothing really to find. There's cool landscapes, there's ruined buildings, but there's nothing inside them. And if you were to compare this to, say, an Elder Scrolls game, where you have a really expansive open world, you walk across the world, you find many things. Not just useful items that you can sell, not just useful items that enhance your power, but you find lore books that expose the setting. You find characters that can tell you about where you are, what city you're standing in, their history, what profession they do, the way the high houses work in Morrowind, the way things work in Skyrim. They can tell you about vampires. They can give you clues to other places to explore. They could tell you about cool treasures. They could tell you about Daedric artifacts. All of these things enhance that exploration experience. But in Breath of the Wild, you climb to the top of a mountain to find essentially nothing there. You explore a bunch of ruins and kill all the monsters in it to get another rusty broadsword, which means nothing. And the item system in the game really contributes to that feeling of nothingness, that nothing you do really matters and there's no real progression and there's no real reason to explore the world that's in front of you. One of the tricks of Breath of the Wild is that you don't quite realize this early on. I think the early experience is actually very good. It doesn't hold your hand, it lets you explore, you find some initially useful items, you find like a sword and you can use a potlet as a shield, you figure out how to cook. The tutorial area, that plateau at the beginning of the game, is actually quite good in the way it presents all the mechanics of the game, the way it presents the world itself and how you're going to interact with it. The problem is once you leave that, you continue to find the same crappy items. You come upon a group of moblins and they're guarding a treasure chest and you kill all of them systematically. You climb up onto the same little platform that exists in every little camp. You open up the chest and you get, 20 rupees. And this, historically, you would see this in old Zelda games. Like, you open up a chest and sometimes you just get a red rupee and you're like, that's how it is. But it just continually happens over and over again until you're opening up chests and you're like, I got some arrows. Cool. I got another rupee. Cool. I got another sword. Oh, my inventory's full. I can't even carry this garbage item. And I have to carry all these garbage items because my items break constantly. And this is very different from a classic Zelda experience where you work really hard to get to that chest and you open it up and it's a new item that you can use to increase your power. You get the hook shot out of a chest, and then you can use it to solve the puzzle of the dungeon, and you can use it to get to places you couldn't get before and gather a heart container, and you're going to use it in the next dungeon to solve things, and you can use it against enemies in new ways. All of that is missing from this game because every time you open up a chest, you just get another garbage item that's exactly the same in terms of its use as every other garbage item. Yes, there are clubs, there are two-handed clubs, there are swords, there are two-handed swords, but they don't vary very significantly in the way they're used compared to, say, having a boomerang, having, all the items that you had in a classic Zelda game. And I think this Zelda game actually actively subverts our expectations in that regard. It actively takes that expectation that we're going to find items and we're going to beat monsters to get things of value, and kind of uses it against the player. After a while, every single camp is the same. You know that the chest is garbage, and you just decide that you're going to stop trying to fight creatures. That's eventually what I did. There's no reason to engage in combat in the game because you're not going to get rewarded for it. And chances are you're going to break the cool weapon that you do have, which you need to beat some other shrine. And shrines are actually another problem with this game. There's so many of them, and they're so spread out, and they're all just one-off puzzles that after a while, finding them out and doing them just becomes a chore. But it becomes a chore that you have to do because they're literally the only way for you to constantly increase your power other than gaining armor pieces, because your weapons just shatter like glass. And that's really the core gameplay problem of Breath of the Wild, is that the world is so empty and devoid of meaning that there's not a lot of reward for exploring. Yes, occasionally you find something that increases your power temporarily, or sometimes kind of permanently, but not by much, or you just kind of get shafted and you've wasted your time, and nobody likes to feel like they've wasted their time. I think actually all the other flaws of the game could be easily overlooked if the game just didn't have this terrible weapon durability system combined with a very empty world that's full of essentially repetitive tasks for you to maintain your power level. However, those are not the only flaws. So with that in mind, let me apply some of my categories that I talk about with books and movies to this particular game, and we can kind of see where I think it really succeeds and the places where it really falls short, in addition to the massive sort of miscalculation with its gameplay. Let's start with aesthetics. I think the aesthetics of Breath of the Wild are actually really on point, as you could probably tell by some of these screenshots. Some of these screenshots are from the PC emulator, so they're a little higher fidelity than what you actually see in the game at 720p, but the aesthetic design overall of the game I think is very good. I like the buildings, the ruins, everything works together. Most of the world, however, is empty wilderness with trees and grass, so there's a lot missing from the aesthetics. So maybe I'd rate it 7, 8 out of 10. The fidelity of this, the effects of it, I think are actually really subpar. Now, I played this game on the Wii U, but my brother-in-law has it on Switch, and it doesn't really look any better on the Nintendo Switch. It maybe looks slightly better, but not really. So it looked pretty much the same on the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch in the categories that really matter when it comes to effects. And the thing about the fidelity of this game is that it feels low fidelity and high fidelity at the same time. The cell shading effect that they use looks really harsh most of the time. There's very, very harsh shadows on most of the characters. The characters look blurry and very jagged. There's no anti-aliasing that seems to be used. Things look kind of blurry in the distance most of the time, and the frame rate is really chugging along. It barely keeps 30 FPS. I think a world with like less waving grass but better frame rates, I probably would have been more satisfied with. I tend to be a frame rates over, high fidelity kind of guy. But this one seemed to have the worst of both worlds. Seemed to have fairly low fidelity and pretty bad frame rates. The trees, as you can tell when you look closely at them, they're a limited number of polygons. Most things tend to be low polygon count. I don't know if the engine they were using wasn't designed well to handle what they were trying to do with it, but overall the technical problems with the game are pretty obvious, and it becomes really disruptive if you're trying to fight monsters, like any kind of group of monsters, and it's, say, raining. All of a sudden you can't see what you're doing, and the action's very indistinct. And at the same time, that lack of anti-aliasing, it kind of stops you from admiring a lot of the beauty of the aesthetics. So you have this interesting relationship in this game between fidelity and aesthetics, where the aesthetics, I think, are actually above what is capable of being delivered in terms of effects and fidelity and graphics processing of the machines that this game was designed for. So that ends up having, I think, a really negative effect. You can't have aesthetics that are beyond what you're capable of actually delivering in terms of graphics. And this game essentially does that, and that's the big problem with it. And I can compare it to other Wii U games like, I don't know, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, which look way better than this, and I wonder how they went wrong with it. It's kind of a curious case. Moving on to sound and music, I also found this game to be pretty flawed in terms of music and sound, especially compared to its forebears. It's pretty sparse with music. There's some tinkly piano music and stuff when you're out exploring, but otherwise it's pretty devoid of a soundtrack, and the ambient sounds that exist in the wild don't really fill in the space or add any kind of feeling to the atmosphere. I think it was a big miss on the music and sound department. Maybe 5 out of 10? 4 out of 10? Returning to gameplay, I have to look at the gameplay in a couple of different levels. I think the actual combat is really good. I don't know, like 8 out of 10. It's really fun to actually swing your sword and hit stuff. There's more moves than you can do than ever before in a Zelda game. It feels tactile, it feels dangerous. It's good, I like it. However, that combat system, which would be like an 8 out of 10, is attached to a bunch of systems that I would give like a 2 or 3 out of 10. The weapons that shatter constantly, the food that you have to constantly cook, the potions you have to constantly cook, and be eating all the time in order to regain hearts, and you can have so much food to regain so many hearts, you wonder, how many hearts do I even really need? You also have most of your useful items attached to this Sheikah slate, and that doesn't progress very much after you leave the plateau, the initial Newbie Island area. Horses also don't work very well. They aren't that fast. They're annoying to use. You can't seem to call them. You can't seem to find your horse. Your horse gets stuck on ledges. And that's extra annoying considering how huge the world is and how utterly empty it is. Walking across a bunch of nothing gets really boring. And while the world looks like a 7 or 8 out of 10, its interactivity is really low. There's not a lot of stuff to find, and the stuff you do find is mostly junk. If you want to talk about story, there's not really much story to Breath of the Wild. Most of the story is exposed within the first few hours of gameplay, and you get a couple tidbits later on, but you don't really learn anything new as you go, other than a few little moments. They're good moments, but there's hours and hours of empty gameplay between them. And at the end, this is much more of a missed opportunity than it is just a pure annoyance. Because other than a few towns, you don't really have many people to talk to, and the people you do talk to in the towns don't really tell you a whole lot about the world. You know, there was this ancient race of like Hylians that built robots, but you never really learn much about them. You never really get to explore the lore behind them. There's an interesting world here, but it's just not on display. It's not exposed. So overall, I think my general effect is like a 6 out of 10, which is to me a mediocre game. I kind of enjoyed playing it. I played it off and on for a year. My son likes to play it, but he makes me take all of Link's clothes off because he thinks that's hilarious. So whenever I play the game, I always feel like I'm doing chores in the game in order to actually play the part of the game that I want to, but the part of the game that I want to play doesn't really reward me for playing it, so I'm just left with not really wanting to play the game. Overall, I just think Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a big miss. Had a huge amount of potential, beautiful world, and it just missed the mark in terms of how that gameplay was going to allow you to access the world and how the world was designed to interest you. This is also a Zelda game that, besides me thinking it's just not as good as other people think it is, I think it's actually a Zelda game that really won't stand the test of time the way others have. I don't see it being a game that people are going to pop into their Switch 10 years from now and play through, because there's just not that much to really experience compared to like Ocarina of Time, compared to Wind Waker even. There's just not that much there. So that's my opinion of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I'm really glad I played the game. I'm glad it was made. I'm glad it took all of the chances that it did, but I hope we can all stop pretending that it's like the second coming of Christ, because I don't think it's that good a game. And in hindsight, I saw my friends playing this game, and I don't think they play a lot of other games. So they might have had a lot of fun playing this game and really loved it, but they may not have had a much better game to really compare it to, now that I think about it. By the way, if you liked this game more than I did, that is A-okay. You're allowed to like stuff. more than me or less than me. In fact, I could see a lot of people actually really liking this game if you liked that fragile weapon system and you found that interesting and fun. I did not. I found it incredibly annoying. And if you felt like a game like Skyrim is just too full of stuff that's annoying, like if you're annoyed by all the lore books and all the stuff that's kind of packed into a game like Skyrim, yeah, this game's probably way more up your alley. It's very action-oriented. So some people may really like it, but I don't think it's that good a game. Thanks so much for listening and watching the screenshots. If you're wondering why I didn't have actual gameplay video, it's because I didn't want to get a copyright strike from Nintendo. They are notorious for doing that kind of thing, and I'm being critical of their games, so it's not like I'm giving them a lot of value by showing their gameplay footage. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate you listening to everything that I have to say, and I will see you all next time.